So I'm very pleased to see so many of you here tonight, and I hope that at least half of you are atheists. I'm not joking. I'm serious. Because why should you remain an atheist for the rest of your life if you can have something else that's far superior to that? Isn't that right? All right, I was an atheist at the age of 10. Now, not many people turn to atheism at the age of 10, especially if they come out of a Christian home like I did, where two denominations were in juxtaposition. My mother was a Lutheran, my father was a Catholic, I was raised a Catholic, and by the age of 10, I was an atheist. I've also come to the conclusion that atheists are not atheists based on information, but they're atheists based on misinformation. And it takes quite a while to go through the maze of this life and to finally come to the conclusion that there is an absolute truth, although you never really saw it. And one wonders, why doesn't, if a God exists, why doesn't he lead you to that truth immediately? Why does he allow you to walk the maze and take many a wrong turn? As a scientist, I have often had experiments that were total failures. And an experiment that is a total failure is not a failure. It's the elimination of something that doesn't work, so that you can find a different path and see whether that works. And sometimes you have many, many failures before you have an eureka moment, and that's fine, as long as you don't become discouraged because of your failures, because a failure is a learning curve. So in my own life, atheism doesn't mean that you do not believe in anything. It means you believe anything but that God exists. That's it. But you believe everything else. And often based on empirical evidence. You find empirical evidence that things out there are not always what they seem. If you become involved in the occult world, as I was involved in the occult world, and you find things moving around without being touched, and people in communication with entities that don't have a visible appearance, well, then your senses tell you that there's something going on here that you cannot understand. But what is it? Is it energy? Is it your own energy? Is it someone else's energy? Who are you talking to? What is the communication all about? So in my life as an atheist, I embraced the theory of evolution. I was an evolutionist. I was a lecturer at university, then a professor at university. I taught evolution. It was my go-to model of how we came to be. And if anybody rattled that cage, then I was acrimonious. In my first confrontation with my colleagues, after having been brought to the point by circumstances, some of them quite hectic, to actually start questioning my core belief on origins, I formulated a few questions. Now, this is amazing. I never formulated any answers. I didn't have any answers. I only formulated questions. And we had a panel at our university where the postgraduate students would come together with the staff, where we would discuss how evolution works and whether it is a bradytelic or a tachytelic or a this or a that or whatever thing. Brady meaning slow evolution, tachy meaning fast evolution. How did it take place? This was the discussion. And it was an exchange of ideas, And you were perfectly entitled to have different ideas as long as they didn't transgress the concept of evolution. Then you could have different ideas. But if you challenged evolution, then you were in trouble. So I had some questions, and I wanted to know how to address them. So my first question was, if the evolution of life started with low diversity, and diversity increased over time, why does the fossil record show higher diversity in the past and lower diversity as time progressed? I mean, obviously it's logical. If life sort of fortuitously developed somewhere in some mud pond, then there was just that little bit of life. And then it must have become more and more and more and more and more. So you must start with a low diversity, increasing to a greater diversity. But if you look at the fossil record, the great diversity was in the past and it became less and less. So why do you have this anomaly? And then if evolution of necessity should progress from small to large creatures, why does the fossil record show the reverse? I actually wrote these questions on the board for discussion. No answer, just questions. Obviously, life had to start small, right? If it's going to start in some pond, you're going to get a unicellular creature developing at some stage. That must become a multicellular creature. That must develop later on to be a multi-layered creature. That must increase and have a tubular form. Did you know that you were tubular? All of you sitting here were tubular or are tubular. You have two orifices. I don't have to go into detail. One is the mouth, and the other one is the other one, and between them there's a tube. So this had to somehow develop, and this takes time. And so you had to start with a small thing. You didn't have some pond and all of a sudden a giraffe jumped out of the pool. There must have been a process in between the unicellular and the giraffe, so it must have gone from small to large, but that is not what we see in the fossil record. We see the opposite. So if you go and look at present size and look at past size, if you look at the lion, that was a lion in the fossil record. That's a female lion who's still smaller than a male. And she was considerably larger than the male lion today. The orangutan, that was about there on the right-hand side. The relationship, what about the capybara? That was the relationship in the past. It was massive. Today it's a shrimp. Or what about that creature over there, the armadillo? The past one and the present one. Would you agree there's a size difference? Or the horse? Or the shark? I mean, the ancient sharks that roamed our seas would use a fully grown white shark today as a toothpick. Or the bisons, or the crocodiles. They were huge compared to what we have today. So is that evolution or is that devolution? Is that going forwards or is that going backwards? These are logical questions. Why should everything have been so different? So the Bible, does it talk about large things? Does it talk about large human beings? Absolutely. We laugh at it and we say this is mythology. This is some fable. Well, was it a fable? All right, my third question, I'm only going to do 10, because that's all I could think of at that stage. Natural selection works by eliminating the weaker variants. So how does a mechanism that works by subtraction create more diversity? Logical. Two creatures, one is fitter than the other. The fit one survives, the other one goes extinct. I started with 2, I end up with what? 1. That's subtraction. So how do I use a mechanism that works by subtraction to create multiplication? How do I get more and more? By creating less and less. And by the way, if I look at the fossil record and I look at the diversity of life in the past, it far, far exceeds anything that we have in the world today. So everything became less and less. So evolution is doing a great job, natural selection at least is, and soon there'll be nothing left. All right, what about point number 4? And this is a bomber. Why do the great phyla of a biome all appear simultaneously in the fossil record? In the oldest fossil records, namely in the Cambrian explosion, when they are supposed to have evolved sequentially. Now, do you have an idea what a phylum is? A phylum is a category of animals that has similar characteristics. And you, for example, and I, belong to the phylum Chordata. One of the subcategories of that phylum is Vertebrata, vertebrates, to which we belong, because we have a vertebrate backbone. But Chordata, whether they have vertebrae or not, even if they have a rod in their back, they are chordates. So there are many, many creatures that belong to a phylum. So if you just take the vertebrates, which is just a subcategory of the phylum Chordata, then you would have the fish in there, you would have the frogs in there, you would have the reptiles in there, you'd have the extinct reptiles, some mammal-like reptiles in there, you would have all the mammals in there. I mean, that's a huge category. And if you compare that with another category, like the mollusks, the mollusca, everything that runs on a muscular foot without any backbone of any nature. So you could have a snail and a squid and an octopus, which works on this muscular system. They all belong to the mollusks. So every seashell that you find, all the creatures that have a muscular foot, all of these snail-like creatures in the world, all of the squids, all of the octopi, they are all part of one phylum. Or your phylum arthropods, arthropoda. Everything that has a jointed leg, like an insect, doesn't have a skeleton. They belong to the arthropods. Huge category, anything from a crayfish to a prawn to an insect to a cockroach to whatever. Anything that you can think of that has these jointed legs, whether it's the fly that irritates you, the mosquito that irritates you, the scorpion that stings you, they all belong to this category. Huge category. Now, think evolution. These totally different organisms, totally different. I mean, the one has an internal skeleton, the other one has an outer skeleton, the other one doesn't even have a skeleton. I mean, it's crazy. All of these appear at exactly the same time. Boom. Is that confusing? That is so confusing. Why do they appear simultaneously in the fossil record? Shouldn't it take millions and millions and millions and millions of years for one to perhaps give rise to another over time? What happened here? And then there's a little bit of a more complicated one. Why do scientists postulate something which they call punctuated equilibrium to explain away the lack of intermediary fossils? Now, you've often heard of the missing link. And people will say maybe there isn't a missing link, but the fact of the matter is there are many missing links. They don't exist, these links. There's no link between an elephant and a giraffe. There's no link. There's no link between any creature from an ape to a human. There's no link. There are conjectures and possibilities, but there's no link. Nothing has ever been found. So why do they have to postulate a scientific thinking pattern which is called punctuated equilibrium? Now let me explain that to you. There are two categories of evolutionists out there. The one they call gradualists, and the other they call punctuated equilibrianists. Now they're quite happy to sit in the same audience and argue with each other about the processes of evolution. They never come to blows, they never fight each other, as long as they stay within the parameters of evolution. So in my own department, the older staff members, they were gradualists. And the younger staff members, they were punctuated equilibrianists. Now, I was a younger staff member, so I was a punctuated equilibrianist. The older staff members clung to the hope that they would find the intermediary fossils which were not there, and therefore they were gradualists. Now, logically, gradualism is the only way to think about evolution. In other words, life evolved gradually over millions of years from one kind to the other. So that's a gradual process. And if that is so, then there must be links between the various groups. Fact of the matter is they don't exist. That's why you have punctuated equilibrianists. That science wouldn't exist if gradualism were true. Wouldn't exist. There would be no need for it. So what does the punctuated equilibrianist mean? It simply means this: I can't find the links between the various groups. They don't exist in the fossil record. So why are they not there? The gradualist says, we haven't found them yet. And the punctuated equilibrianist will say, let's be real, guys. They don't exist. We have millions and millions of fossils. They don't exist. So it must have happened differently. Long periods of nothing happening, equilibrium, no change whatsoever. So there's nothing changing in the fossil record. They're the same. And then punctuated, boom, change. Boom, one day to the next, boom, new kind. But it was so fast that there's no fossil in between the two. Two theories. The one specifically designed to explain something anomalous in the original theory. That tells you something. That must make you think that something weird is going on. Point number 6. If natural selection works at the level of the phenotype, now I'm going to use some terms. This is not a university class, and you don't have to pass an exam afterwards. So it doesn't matter whether you understand the terms or not. It's not important, as long as you get the concept. So here's some names that you might not be familiar with, like natural selection works at the level of the phenotype and not the level of the genotype. Then how did genes, mitosis, meiosis, with all their intricacies, come into existence? All right. Basically, natural selection can only operate on what actually is there. If I want to know who runs faster, let's say it's the Olympics, and I want to know who runs faster, what must I have? Think logically. I must have some runners. I can't ask the question, who runs faster, if there's nobody that can run? All right, so I want to know who runs faster. Does Martin run faster? Or does someone else in the audience run faster? So we'll call them together and we'll say, take a sprint down the hall. And we'll check out which one runs faster. So there must be a Martin and there must be a someone else, right? Okay. Now what if Martin didn't exist yet? What if he was just a twinkle in his father's eye and he didn't exist yet? Could I check whether he's going to run faster or not? Do you get the concept? So natural selection can only work on what is actually there. It can't be a twinkle in an eye. It can't be a philosophy in a book. I want to know who runs faster. There must be a Martin and there must be someone else who can run. Otherwise, I can't figure it out. So natural selection can only operate on what is already there. It cannot ask the question because it doesn't have a brain. Where did he come from? Or how did he come into existence? Or who wrote the blueprint about him? It cannot operate on that level. It can only operate on what is there. So who wrote the blueprint about him coming into existence? Isn't that a fair question? We'll go into it in a little bit more detail. Then there's some questions about crossing over and how can we explain the evolution of two sexes? Now, this is a weird one. How do you explain the evolution of two sexes? What do the scriptures say on that issue? He created them, male and female. That's what the scriptures say, isn't that right? And then it tells you about all these animals that came 2 by 2 in pairs. A male with his female. Now that's a misnomer for evolution. Because the two sexes are the answer for variety. Remember, natural selection makes less and less, right? So the question then arises, how do you get more and more? Right? It's a logical question. So, scientists aren't dumb. They have to think about answers. So natural selection makes less and less, but actually everything became more and more. So what are we going to do about that? How did the mechanisms to create the variety, to have the possibility of more and more, how did it come into existence? Two sexes. Then we can mix information between the two and we have new information. That's how it came into being. Aha! Question. Where did the two sexes come from? Because natural selection can only get the more variety once the two of them are actually there. This is getting kind of confusing now. So how did they come into existence? Answer? Had to be chance. One day Eve popped up. Yeah, right. Maybe I should believe that. It would explain quite a few complexities that I have in my life. It's a wonderful idea that there are two sexes. By the way, the scriptures say that the female came out of whom? Out of Adam. That's not even logical. Everybody knows I was born of a woman. I called her my mother. So isn't it more logical for the woman to be first than for the male to be first? But the scriptures say she came out of the male. Now, purely scientifically, is it possible for Eve to give rise to a male? No. No. Unfortunately, Eve lacks something. And Eve's, don't you forget it. you lack something. You don't have a Y chromosome. You only have an X chromosome. Does Adam have an X chromosome? Yes, he has. So Adam can give rise to Eve, but Eve, sorry, you can't give rise to Adam. So they're interesting little nuances, but I'm digressing. There are other problems: the origin of matter, the origin of the genetic code, the irreducible complexity, the universal flood. Do these things really exist? Where do I come from? Please answer me. And the Bible says, He spoke, and it stood fast. Doesn't it say that somewhere? He spoke. He was a word. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was not anything made that was made. He spoke. Okay. What did He speak it out of? Out of nothing. Although He did form humanity out of the dust of the ground, but the others, no. There was no question of that. He spoke, and there they were. So what does science say? Well, let's ask the physicists, the quantum physicists, where do we come from? And they will tell you that we came from nothing. So one of the top scientists in that field was Lawrence Krauss, and he says the answer is nothing. And under our current understanding of physics, and contrary to traditional logic, it is not just probable that we got something out of nothing, it is absolutely inevitable that everything came out of nothing. So where did the nothing come from? And the nothing came from a big bang. So what exploded? Nothing. Now I'm talking science, I'm not talking scripture here. I'm talking science. So nothing exploded and created everything. That's contrary to logic, right? Ex nihilo. What's the first thing that the scripture says God made? And it was evening and it was morning and it was evening the first day. What was the first thing? Light. Let there be light. Okay, what does light consist of? Consists of something called photons. Photons. Okay, so light consists of photons. Can a photon hit something and leave its mark? The answer is yes. Have you ever heard of a photographic plate? Or in the old days, a film strip? If you shot a light beam at it, it would leave its mark. It hit it, and it would leave its mark. And then you could develop it, and you could see something. So a photon could actually hit something. Great. So light consists of photons, and photons can actually hit something and leave a mark. So it must be matter. Photon must consist of something, because if it hits something, it leaves its mark. If I throw a pebble at you, it will leave a mark. You'll have a red spot. Okay, so let's take one photon and aim it at a photographic plate and shoot it through a hole. On the other side, it leaves a mark. One photon. Okay, let's make two holes and take one photon and shoot it at two holes. How many marks in the back? One photon, two holes, and I'm shooting it through a hole. How many marks in the back? Logically, how many? One. Practically, how many? Two. Okay, let's make 10 holes. 10 holes. Okay, I'll shoot one photon through 10 holes. How many marks in the back? 10. I'll make 1,000 holes. Shoot 1 photon. How many marks in the back? 1,000. Okay. So it can't be matter. Because matter can't do that. Only a wave or energy can do that. So it must be a wave. But how can a wave leave its mark if there's nothing? Do you see, science is confusing. So science tells me everything was made out of nothing. And if you really analyze light, it's not matter. It's really nothing, but it leaves a mark. So it gets rather interesting. So where all this stuff come from? Well, nothing exploded and then changed into a gas, hydrogen. Eventually, some of the hydrogen collided and formed helium. And eventually, all of this gas expanding somehow had to contract and make a star so they could get nuclear fusion, and out of the helium and the hydrogen make all the other atoms that are necessary. And then I'll explode that star, and I'll put all of these new things into the environment, and then I'll jump them together and I'll create planets, and I'll circle them around the sun so that they're nice and hot. And then I can get the evolution of life. That's the conjecture. But what exploded in the first place? Nothing. And then it created the gas. And the gas had to form the other elements, so I need a star. Have you ever popped a balloon and tried to gather the gas back together again? Now imagine in a vast vacuum, getting it to coalesce again. Okay, what am I going to use to coalesce it? I'm going to use gravity. Ha-ha! I've got it. I'm going to use gravity. And pop my balloon and going to use gravity to gather it and make a ball. Has ever anybody demonstrated something as foolish as that? No. But it had to happen, otherwise you can't get matter. You see, it's not as simple as you think. What about the evolution of the molecules of life? This gets very complicated. Aha, they say, we have scientific evidence. We create a primitive atmosphere, and we create a closed system, and we boil it, and voila, we have all the elements of life. Not true. You might get some things, but you can't use the present atmosphere because that contains oxygen, the bottom one there. And you can't use volcanic gases because that contain carbon monoxide. So what are you going to do now? You can't get the molecules from that. You have to create another atmosphere. Where did it come from? Well, I don't know where it came from. And then when you do get the molecules, you get left and right-handed ones. Have you ever looked at your hands? Just look at your hands. Go ahead, look at them. Don't be afraid. They won't do anything. Just look at them. Have you noticed that the one is a mirror image of the other one? I mean, your thumb is on the left-hand side here and on the right-hand side there. It's a mirror image. It would look kind of funny if it weren't, right? It sounds like a very simple thing. Hello? Your genetic information has made a perfect mirror image. In fact, half of you is a mirror image. Half of you. Have you ever put a mirror in the middle and looked at the two sides of your face and see that they're different? Mirror image. You are a mirror image. So your information must make a mirror of you and sew you together. It's mind-boggling how it works. But in molecules, you also have mirror images. But the body can't use mirror images. It can be useless. You can't make a protein with a right-handed amino acid, so shove them in your pocket. But if you create them haphazardly, you get left and right. So how do you make the first protein that only consists of left? Because if you put a number right in there, just 1 in 100, it's useless. Doesn't work. So you must have some mechanism to choose only the ones that you can use, because you can't use this one. Put it in your pocket. So I must only choose this one. So what do I need? To choose only this one. I need an enzyme. That's it. I got an enzyme, and an enzyme, excuse me, the enzyme also only consists of left. How did it get into existence? I mean, it's not as easy as they make it out in the books. It's really complicated. And you ask yourself the question, how did it come about? Or how did these molecules come about? Because none of the atmospheres that we used before worked to create it. And by the way, did life really explode? Well, this is Scientific American. Look what it says. It says many of the phyla appeared almost simultaneously. That's a lie. They appeared simultaneously. But it would sound rather presumptuous to say simultaneously, so they snuck the word almost in there. And then how fast did it happen? Well, they have to admit, fast turns out to be much faster than anyone ever thought. Boom, they were there. Excuse me, does that sound like evolution? And what about our own phyla? I mean, we're the numero uno, we're the alpha. We should be at the top of the pile. We're the last ones to evolve because we're perfect. Excuse me, they were there in the Cambrian. The Cambrian. Chordates were there from the beginning, part of the explosion. But what about these marvelous pictures that you get in all the textbooks on the evolution? And it tells you that all of these reptiles, up at the top line there, you have the ones that exist today. I'm sorry that it's in German, but I assume you all understand German, right? The pictures are English. So you have snakes, and you have lizards, and you have crocodiles, and you have birds, and you have tortoises, and things like that, turtles up at the top. And then you have all these others, and this is how they evolved. And they came out of a group known as the amphibians, which are frogs. Because obviously a frog must be more primitive than a reptile. Or you can just look at its heart, for example, and the number of heart chambers that it has, and you will see that it only has 3, and the fish only has 2, and a reptile has 4 with holes in it, and the mammal has 4 without holes in it. So there's a progression there. So obviously the reptiles came out of the amphibians, and there you put them on a nice evolutionary tree, and you say that the snake over there came from an amphibian. Now, excuse me, that can't be. The snake must have come out of a reptile. But where does that line connect it to? It says up there, Schlangen, which is snakes. And you take the line all the way down, 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 and you come to the amphibian. Why is there nothing in between? For the simple reason the in-between doesn't exist. So this is conjecture. This is how we see it, how it possibly happened, without knowing how it happened. So we have all of these beautiful pictures that are based on nothing other than pure conjecture. There is no evidence. And so I put together this little drawing over here, and I want to say to you that this is how dogs evolved. Obviously, from science, I know that everything came from small and went to large. So I'll start at the bottom with a Chihuahua. I'll put him at the bottom of my pile, over there. That's the Chihuahua. And I'll have an evolutionary line of those with upright ears, and I get from small to larger, and I have the shepherd dog up there. Then I have a floppy ear ones, and I put them on there, and, you know, I want to make a sausage dog. So I put all the flat one with the short legs over there, and I have the basset on the top and the dachshund somewhere in the middle. And then I have the big dogs over there, and I'll put the St. Bernard at the top because that's the biggest one. And the bulldog is such a mess, I'll just put him on the side. That's how it happened. It's It's perfectly logical. It's the same what the scientists do with the other fossils. Did it happen this way? No. How do I know? How do I know? Because all of them came out of the wolf. All of them. So actually I must put the wolf at the bottom and all the others at the top. But that would be contrary to logic. But that's the fact of the matter. So the wolf contained all the information for every dog type that there is in the world. And the genetics of humanity contain all the information for every single human being in the world. And will the two of you, even if you're twins, that are absolutely identical in every single way, please stand up. Why are you not standing up? What's wrong with you? Because you can't, right? Because there's nobody in this hall that's absolutely identical. So where does that variety come from? From evolution? From two sexes coming into existence? Boom, one day? There must be built-in variety, so somebody must be a lover of variety. When it comes to the evolution of the horse, that is what you'll say. They'll say the smallest one, of course, at the bottom, we'll call that Hyracotherium. Why would you give it a name like that? Well, because it resembled the hyrax. In good old Afrikaans, somebody said I must use Afrikaans words. So here's one. Dassie, die dassie. So die dassie het die oorsprong gegee aan die perd. The hyrax gave origin to the horse. If you want to believe that, that's what science says. And it will create them from small to large. But the fact of the matter is that all these varieties are contemporaneous, just like you get tall people and short people in the world. What about the evolution of man? All these nice fossil assemblages that they give you in the textbooks. And they'll put Australopithecus at the bottom. By the way, what does the name Pithecus mean? Australopithecus robustus, Australopithecus, whatever, all the different specific names for them. What does the word Pithecus mean? It means ape. So in other words, they were either all ape or they were all human. But there is no intermediary fossil, no matter what they want to say. Now let me just unpack this phenotype, genotype thing for you a little bit more and see that you understand it. Genotype is on the left there, and it's basically what your genes look like. And the phenotype is what you look like. And as I explained, if I want to know if Martin runs faster than John, then Martin and John must both be present and they must exist, so there must be phenotypes. And I don't care about the twinkle in their parents' eyes. So, the phenotype. The genotype came about by chance. Okay. Natural selection had nothing to do with it, because it cannot operate on documents. It can only operate on what's there. Let me make that simple. The genotype is the blueprint as to how to build that aeroplane. The aeroplane is the phenotype. So the book has the information on the aeroplane. The aeroplane can be tested whether it works or not. And you normally put a test pilot in there who gets a heck of a lot of money because it's a dangerous job. What if that thing doesn't fly? And if you want to have selection, then you must have two of them at least. So here's a question. Natural selection works on the phenotype. The genotype came together by chance. You've heard the funny story about 100 monkeys typing forever and ever and ever, and eventually they typed the Encyclopedia Britannica. You heard that, right? It's never been demonstrated, but that's the theory. That's how it works. Dawkins wrote a book called The Blind Watchmaker. Doesn't know what he's doing, but somehow it comes together by chance. So my question is very simple to you today. There's the genotype. It's the book containing the information to build the aeroplane. My question is, who wrote the book? Be logical. Who wrote the book, in this case, containing the blueprint as to how to build the aeroplane? An engineer, right? An engineer. An aeronautics engineer. He wrote the book. Now, in your case, who wrote the book? Who wrote your blueprint? Well, either chance, the 100 monkeys, or somebody wrote the book. Science says it happened by chance. Now, how complicated is the book? The science of genetics is incredibly complex. Nobody has figured it out. They say, oh, we have the genetic blueprint. They have squat. They have nothing. They have a little bit of the gene sequences of what makes something look like it looks, but there are thousands of genes that they haven't got a clue as to what they're doing. They call them debris genes, just because they don't know what they do. Who wrote this book? It's very complicated. Okay. Did you know that genes can be activated and deactivated? That's a very complex thing. You want to switch on a gene and you want to switch off a gene. Okay, let's make it very simple. I have two monitors in the front here. You can't see them, but I can. And I want the one on and the other one off. What must the guy in the back have? He must have a switch. So he can switch that one off. If I say, I don't want that one, I want this one. So he switches that one off and he switches this one on. Question, where did the switch come from? It's got nothing to do with the light, but it has to be there, otherwise I can't switch it on and off. Where did the switch come from in this case? Chance. Chance, put it there. Oh, I can switch one gene off and the other one off. One wonderful thing. Can I have more than one switch, please? Can I have 10 switches between 10 genes? What if I want to have this one on dim? Oh, that's easy. We'll put a dimmer in the back. Who designed the dimmer in the back to make the one light dimmer than the other one? Some engineer. But when it comes to your genes, who did it? Chance. There's no God. Chance. I'll tell you something, if it doesn't work, you're in big trouble. Did you know that I can go and change my genetic makeup by taking genes, which are called transposons, that orange portion over there, and cutting it out and translocating it to another place where there's a dimmer switch so that it's red less or brighter. So I must be able to put it on bright, I must be able to put it on low. And it's so complicated, and I can create more variety. I can dim a switch, I can brighten a switch. I'm making this very simple now. And did you know that I can go in one generation from a Minnie Mouse to a Maxi Mouse? Just by translocating a gene to a place where the dim switch is on bright. That means the gene gets read more often. So if I want them to grow quickly and bigger, I need growth hormone to be more than in the small mouse. Simple. I'll take the gene that codes for growth hormone, I'll translocate it to a location where there is a dimmer switch that is on bright, and voila, I have a Maxi Mouse, Mighty Mouse. Excuse me, is that chance or is that design? Now this is amazing. As science studied more and more and more about the genes, you don't have to know all this stuff, just contemplate the magnitude of it. They discovered that genes can be put into a resting phase and into an active phase. And so the gene is rolled up around a protein structure which is called a histone, and there the gene is not read. It is quiet. It's on page 70 of your book that you're reading, but you're busy reading page 120. Okay, what's happening on page 120? What's happening on page 70 has been laid to rest. It's been switched off. It's quiet. It's resting. You're not reading page 70 at the same time as you're reading page 120. Switch off page 70. But the next page is page 121. So I want to switch off page 120 and I want to activate page 121. It's done through a process which today we call epigenetics, where something in the environment attaches to something which is called the histone tail, and all of a sudden I can activate and deactivate genes. And for the first time, science realized that I don't only transfer the blueprint of humanity to my children. In other words, when my wife and I have a child, I certainly hope that it's going to be a human being, right? Please let it be a human being and not a frog. So out comes a human being. But did you know that that little human being can inherit my tendencies, my dispositions? If I'm an angry man, or I'm a cheerful man, or I'm an alcoholic, or I'm a pervert, did you know that that child can inherit those tendencies? Because the genes that I have active that create these propensities in me, when they are active, can be transferred to my offspring. And for the first time, science realized I'm not only passing on humanity, I'm passing on my character. My poor kids, they struggle with my propensities. It's my fault. Can they do something about it? Yes, they can. They can. They can adopt a lifestyle or decision-making capacity to counteract my tendencies. So let's say I have a tendency to eat, let's say, certain foods which cause cancer, and I love those foods. Then all the genes that help me to cope with it, that I don't die instantly, are active in me, and I pass that activity on to my poor kids, and they have a propensity to get cancer. They're doomed. No, they're not. They can make a choice. And they can say, I'm not going to consume what my father and my mother consumed. I'm going to change my lifestyle. I'm going to cut this stuff that I know is bad for you. I'm going to cut it out. What happens to those genes that are all alive and active and happy? What happens to them? They're no longer tickled on their histone tails. They start wrapping up and they go to sleep. Their history. How long does it take to get a bad habit out of a system? Completely. What does science say? 3 to 4 generations. I will visit the iniquity of the parents on the children to the 3rd and 4th generation. I can do something about it. I can fight it. I can alter it. If I have a propensity for breast cancer, I don't have to remove my breasts. I can change my lifestyle. I'm talking realities of what's happening in the world. People actually do that. Fascinating. So complicated. so intricate. How did it come into existence? Chance. Chance. I want to wrap it up by talking about something very simple called irreducible complexity. Because this is fascinating. Here's a scientific publication about something that has an irreducible complexity, namely the bacterial flagella motor, which all the men here have as well, and the female in other portions of the body as well. The male sperm cell has a flagellum, and it has all of these amazing flagella proteins, the FLIF, FLIG, FLIM, FLIN, FLIG, daddly-dee, daddly-da, daddly-da. And it looks like that. And it has a stator motor. And it's a fascinating machine. And you get two kinds. For example, you have E. coli or Salmonella, and their flagella motor runs on protons, on hydrogen. And then you have another organism called Vibrio, and it doesn't run on hydrogen, it runs on sodium. In other words, I have two engines here, and these are amazing. Amazing, that's what they look like. They have a lot of similarities, but they run on different fuels. Do we have that in the motor industry? Do we have cars with engines that run on different fuels? They have similarities, right? When you open them up and you check them out, they have pistons. But the one has spark plugs, the other one doesn't have spark plugs. They look different. The one runs on what the British call petrol, and the Americans call gas. And the other one runs on diesel, two motors. Now, if I told you that the diesel engine in its completeness, so that it's actually functional, or the petrol engine in its completeness, that it's actually functional, one day fell out of the sky and was fully operational, would you believe me? Okay? Could I get it by evolution? Let's say a piston involved one day, and there was a piston. And in another place, a crankshaft came into existence. And in another place, whatever else was needed to make it functional, a carburetor in the case of the petrol one, and a high-pressure system in the other one came by chance. Would they come together to create this engine? Never. And so it is with these two engines. They have to be in that configuration absolutely perfect. And by the way, they have a forward gear and they have a reverse gear. They can go forward and they can go backwards. They have an accelerator. They can go fast or they can go slow. And they have a 4x4 switch because they can increase their torque so they can go over a hill. Otherwise, ladies, you could never become pregnant if all of that wasn't built into that motor. Question: how does science explain the complexity if the complexity is irreducible? It's got to be there in its totality. It can't develop incrementally, and yet it exists. Or let's make something very simple. What color is a leaf? It's green. Why is it green? Because it contains chlorophyll. What is the chlorophyll in? It's in something called a chloroplast. So in a chloroplast that looks exactly like there on the right, that is the configuration. And you take this leaf and you hold it in the sun, and it produces sugar. Sugar. And from that sugar, you can, through enzymes, create everything else that you need to stay alive. So here's a powerhouse. It's a power station. and you put in light and water on the one side, and you hold the funnel on the other side, and out comes sugar. Must be the easiest thing to feed humanity with a system like that. Has anybody ever duplicated it? Imagine taking a stick. Just take a stick, shove it in the ground, make a hole in the stick, put a bottle underneath, and collect maple syrup. Isn't that exactly what happens? Isn't that tree a stick, and you put it in the ground, and you make a hole in it, and out comes maple syrup? It's marvelous. How did it come into existence? It has to have that configuration. It has to look exactly like that, or it doesn't work. It's called irreducible complexity. I'm telling you, it needs a designer, because it cannot come into existence by itself, no matter how you boggle it. So when you look at the fossils, they've always been what they've been. So this one, was it more primitive than one that can fold its wings? Or did they both occur at the same time? The earliest fossils that you find of a fly's eye or an insect's eye, with its complexity, by the way, the Hubble telescope is designed on this basis, with that complexity was complete from the first time you ever find it in the fossil record. There's no incremental increase. This smacks of design. I can't believe it, Fred, 60 million years since I've last seen you and you haven't changed a bit. Except that he got smaller. All right, so we have all of these complexities. Now I put those questions on the board. What do you think was the reaction of my colleagues? I asked the questions, all right? I gave you some answers. I didn't really. I just gave you questions. I didn't really give you any answers. I just gave you questions. What do you think was the reaction of my colleagues to my questions? They all said, wow, that gives me something to think about, right? No, that was not their reaction. Some of them were literally foaming at the mouth. Literally. They were so angry they jumped out of their skins. I gave a lecture at another big university, the highest ranked university in my country. 400 students plus lecturers sitting over there. And the audience was split like this. Half the audience said, wow, I never thought of that. And what did the other half do? They were furious. Furious. The one professor got up, he walked to the front and he spat in my face in front of everyone. Spat in my face. I took a handkerchief and I wiped it off. And I told a story. I said, there was a man, and he took a stone and he threw it down a dark alley. And a dog yelped. What does that mean? It means I hit him. Do you get my drift? That means I hit you. I hit you somewhere. I hit you somewhere where you don't like it. Why don't you like it? Because you have to change your worldview? Because if there is a designer, it means you have a responsibility towards the designer. That means you're not alone in this world. You can't hope for an extraterrestrial. You can't hope for Donald Trump to dig you out of the mess, to come arrest some prime minister that he doesn't like. You can't do that. You're responsible to someone. And what if that someone has a set of rules and you don't like rules? I don't like rules. Nobody likes rules. Do you like all the rules that you have? No. Sometimes the pain of not obeying them is worse than the pain of obeying them. So, some people are kept in check by fear. Some people are kept in check by morality. I mean, it differs from person to person. Who cares as long as society somehow operates? But if there is someone out there, and he is the designer, does he then have some connection with me, or does he just leave me? Question. If there is a deity out there, I actually asked that question once. I was sitting in a church and I was feeling miserable about myself, and I needed a priest to talk to. And that priest was out shopping. So I asked his associate people when he would be back. And they said they didn't know. I could sit and wait. So I waited. But his shopping list was very long, so he didn't pitch up. So I figured to myself, well, if I really need this one to ensure my peace of mind, then what happens if he doesn't pitch up and I get run over by a bus in the interim? So eventually I got to the point where I said, if there is a God, then reveal yourself to me. Man, that's the worst question I ever asked in my life, because I got an answer. And that's why I'm standing on this stage, because I'm telling you that such a God exists. And did you know that he's the only one in the all of Scripture, and I'm talking not about only biblical Scripture, all sacred writings in the entire world, that took the responsibility for my actions upon himself? That's like a father stepping in when the son does wrong and protects him and says, I'll bear the consequences. He actually cared. He actually cared. And then when I look at the world and I see that he's the most maligned, the most misunderstood, the most hated, the most sidestepped individual in the entire universe, I ask myself the question, why? What is it about him that nobody wants? Or why is it that they want some of him but not all of him? Some of them love the redemption side, but they hate the king side, because the king has rules and governments and all kinds of stuff like that. Anyway, I hope I made you think tonight that maybe there's a God out there, and maybe he has a plan. Now, if he has a plan, why is everything in such a mess? He seems to be a pretty poor housekeeper. Do you know what they call him? An absentee landlord. Do you know why so many people don't find truth? It's because they don't seek. They're comfortable with their circumstance. And the scripture says, seek and you shall find. Knock and the door shall be opened unto you. So sometimes God has to allow circumstances in your life that are perhaps not the rosiest, just to get you to the point where you seek. Is there a God out there with this mess in this world? Is there a God out there that cares when little children go through what they have to go through in this world? When they start cutting them up before they're even 3 years old, good gracious, what's going on in this world? Is there a God out there? Seek and you will find. May God bless you, and thanks for listening.